We need these United Nations more than ever, but the United Nations now also need the world to protect it.
Dit keer zitten we niet in onze vertrouwde studio in Hilversum, maar op een plek waar een cruciaal fundament van de moderne wereldorde ooit werd bedacht. Het Vredespaleis in Den Haag. Hier, waar recht boven macht zou moeten staan, spreek ik een van de meest invloedrijke diplomaten van dit moment. De voorzitter van de Algemene Vergadering van de Verenigde Naties, Annalena Baerbock. Zij is hier in Nederland voor de 80ste verjaardag van het Internationaal Gerechtshof. Maar valt er eigenlijk wel wat te vieren? Want het systeem dat precies dat moet gaan verdedigen, recht boven macht, staat onder druk. Oorlogen woeden, grootmachten negeren regels en diplomatie lijkt soms niet meer dan theater. Wat blijft er over van internationaal recht als landen het naast zich neerleggen? Annalena Baerbock stond als Duits minister van Buitenlandse Zaken midden in die geopolitieke storm. En zit er nu als voorzitter van de General Assembly misschien nog wel dieper in. Herzlich willkommen, mevrouw Baerbock.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much for having me on your great show.
Thank you for joining us. We find ourselves in a truly remarkable place, historic setting, the Peace Palace in The Hague, one of the world's foremost centers of international law and diplomacy, of course. Can you describe the significance of this institution for you personally?
The Peace and Justice Palace is a beauty, not only because it's a palace, but also a beauty for international law, because without justice there would be no peace, there would be no sustainable development, there would be no human rights. And therefore, as a president of the General Assembly, it feels good to be here. And by profession, being a public international lawyer, it feels also a bit like coming home.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I want to ask a question about it. You yourself have a master's degree in international law, but you chose for might above rights. You didn't follow a career path of a lawyer.
Yeah, you know what, there's a funny story. Actually, this morning I started to see the president of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. I've been there before, and when I was there last time as a foreign minister, I said, you know what, I applied as an intern, you didn't take me, so I had to do the curve as a foreign minister to come back, and now I came as a president of the General Assembly. I mean, yeah.
So that's the reason you followed politics in the end.
Yeah, yes, but I don't know why. You never know why. If you look at CVs, people say, well, this is kind of straight, but I did a lot of sports when I was a teenager, so I was not into politics at all, but I was always interested in justice and human rights. I think it was in the 90s, I guess we're a similar age, at the Western Balkan Wars, when many refugees came back then, also in my little village next to Hanover in Germany, in my class. And for me it was kind of a topic, this point of, why, like, close to us, there are falling bombs again. My grandmother always told me about the stories from war, kind of stories being raped, which I did not understood when she was telling it to me. And for me, I always had this feeling, okay, somehow I have to write about these injustices. This is why I started at school writing, and then I wanted to become a journalist. And actually for this journalism, I studied public international law, because I thought, okay, if you want to write about war, if you want to write about human rights, you should understand the legal grounds behind it. And then it turned out a bit differently.
Yeah, and 80 years is quite a milestone for this institution. Congratulations, of course. We all want to grow old, but aging also comes with its challenges. Wrinkles, losing your hair in, stiff legs. So what does turning 80 mean for an institution like the ICG?
Wisdom, I would say.
Wisdom.
We always want to go to our grandparents to hear some wise words, and I would say now for a court, this is really the baseline, and especially when international law is under attack, we should have the wisdom that this institution were built for a reason, because unfortunately my country, Nazi Germany, committed the most severe and most horrible crimes, the Holocaust, the genocide, but also the war of aggression against a neighboring country, including the Netherlands. And therefore to understand that the ICJ here, the court, was built for a reason. The UN was built for the reason that this should never happen again. And when I hear sometimes people saying, well, but obviously international law doesn't help or the UN doesn't help, I always remind them that one of the first Secretary Generals said, well, the United Nations was built for preventing humanity from hell and not to bring them to heaven. So these institutions are there for the bad times, and this is why we have to protect them in the good times.
This is a bad time, so how close are we to hell?
Well, there's a great song as well, Highway to Hell, but
Because really, what's the reason to celebrate today? Because there's a lot going on, we will talk about it of course, but is there something to celebrate today?
Celebrate that the generations before us found the strengths, even though they have been through the worst things, to believe that together they can build a better future. And this faith that we had the grandfathers but also the grandmothers only a few back then, to understand that building the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is not something naive, what we hear today sometimes, but they've been the realistic people, because they knew what the opposite of international law, human rights, would mean: total destruction. And this is what we are celebrating, but not as a big birthday party. When I started as president of the General Assembly, also being 80, this is why we're in the 80th session of the General Assembly, I said, yeah, this is no time for celebration. It's rather a time for recommitment, because the United Nations are under pressure. I had to correct myself in the beginning of this year, and I said in front of the 193 member states, now the UN is under direct attack, and this is why 80 years means that we have to defend these institutions, the United Nations, but also the International Court, because they are our life insurance.
Yeah, you mentioned the United Nations Charter, which we can describe as the Bible of the United Nations, international law. It is under direct attack, big words. Could you explain what's going on now? Is international law under crisis? Is the Charter in crisis?
For sure.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the UN doesn't function anymore, and for sure it doesn't mean that it's not worth it anymore. The opposite is true. We need these United Nations more than ever, but the United Nations now also need the world to protect it, because if some members, and unfortunately key members, because members of the Security Council who do have a special right, the veto power, but it was given to them to protect international peace and security, having a responsibility to protect it. But if these permanent members of the Security Council are not protecting peace and security, but rather attacking the Charter and breaching the most important articles about the sovereignty of every country, that a war of aggression is not allowed, that you have to comply with international humanitarian law, obviously, even literally, the UN is under direct attack. And this is why the other member states have to stand up even more strongly. And this is why, even though we are in difficult times, I'm still having an optimistic view. First of all, because I believe you should not be in international politics and diplomacy if you're not a structural optimist. So the glass is always half full, even though it sometimes looks quite empty. But also because I see every day when I'm chairing the General Assembly that the vast majority of the 193 is 150% committed to defend this charter. Some do not dare, because we see also blackmailing. But if they join forces and unite, for example, at the beginning of the session in September, when we had the two-state solution conference chaired by France and Saudi Arabia with regard to the situation, the back then horrible situation in Gaza, it was 142 member states. It was not all of them, but it was a vast majority which pushed the Security Council then to finally pass a resolution which we waited for a very long time. So there is a power of the General Assembly if the member states, the majority has the courage to form a cross-regional coalition for the UN, and this is kind of my job. Sometimes I feel like a cheerleader for international law to encourage everybody to work together, and this is why the theme of my session is better together. A
cheerleader for international law, that one will not forget. Let us turn to your role at the United Nations as President of the General Assembly. You have chosen to fulfill this role in a very interesting time. The UN is under pressure, both politically, financially, of course. its very reputation is at stake, so you thought, that sounds like my kind of job. I have to be part of this party.
Well, actually in Germany, a couple of journalists were saying, but why is she now going to the UN? This is just representation duty, which is obviously not. Even in calmer times, yes, the president of the General Assembly, like in every parliament, you are the chair over the session, so you give every member of the parliament, or here every member state, a fair and equal chance to represent their cause. But we know also from politics that even the agenda sometimes can be highly controversial. And in a time where, as I said, every paragraph of the Charter of the United Nations is under attack, I'm in this time also the strongest defender for the United Nations, its rules of procedure and its principles being enshrined in the Charter. And so the background negotiations, how do we achieve this two-thirds majority I was speaking about? How do we act in a situation, for example, when we had around the 8th of March, International Women's Day, a convention with regard to the rights of women, which has been there for decades, always debates on it, but no fundamental debates. Suddenly there were amendments being tabled by the Americans, but also supported, for example, by Russia and others, to question some of these fundamental women's rights again. And also with the kind of pressure and the tone, again, which would threaten smaller delegations. So in these kind of situation, the role of the president is also to see how can we bring groups together? How do I work in this situation together with the person chairing the permanent representative from Costa Rica? Having the courage to say, okay, we put it now on open vote, even though in the past the principle was consensus. If consensus is being used of undermining what we have achieved together, then obviously we have to bring it to a vote. So in these times, this is a way more political role, and probably, I had to redefine the role of the presidency of the General Assembly because I'm swore my oath on protecting the United Nations.
You were sworn oath on the UN Charter?
Yeah, the original one, and this is, you asked me in the beginning about how it feels sometimes. Having my hand over, it was even shivering a bit because this was a document from San Francisco being brought, and they told me before, don't even dare to touch it.
All right, I didn't know that. And what's interesting, you previously served as Germany's foreign minister. You represented one country. You were often quite outspoken when it comes to human rights, women's rights. So now you represent the international community, and you said something very interesting. You said, I'm trying to redefine my role. So what are the boundaries and what are the possibilities in your role as President of the General Assembly?
If you serve as a foreign minister, you are swearing the oath on your national charter, representing your country and the people of your country, therefore speak on behalf of more than 80 million Germans. Obviously now I'm speaking on behalf of 193 member states, more than 8 billion people all around the world, as diverse as you can imagine. But the good thing is that also in the German constitution, which is based on the UN Charter because it was written after the Second World War with all these horrible crimes, the first line reads about the Würde des Menschen, so the dignity of every human being. And this is similar like we the people of the world, which are also humanity in its all. So the fundamentals are the same. So the job as a foreign minister was also, in a way, the best preparation for the job right now to defend this.
It was a traineeship for this role. You had to learn it.
Yeah. I'm anyway a fan on you never been born into something. You grow by the responsibilities you're being tasked with, and you grow in a team. And defending these principles help because, frankly speaking, yes, I mean, member states tried, I was mentioning that even the gender is controversial, to blackmail the president. And quite open, you know, I had to say at one moment, I had a drone over my head visiting a crisis area, Ukraine. I had fake news. I had even deep fakes about me. So if you were trying to blackmail me, I resisted for a couple of years. So I'm only 1 year in office.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by fake news from a certain part, from a certain country when you've started fulfilling? Yes.
Yeah, there were different. It started when I ran for chancellor, because back in time, my party and myself, I was very clear on Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline, not only being, as it was called by many then, a purely economic pipeline, but I always said this is a security threat to Europe. And I mean, there were swaps of gas storages, and myself, Robert Habeck, back then we were the ones speaking out on this. So it was a threat for Russia, obviously. So there's even a Secret Service report about it. The interference also coming from Russia back then with fake news on myself being a prostitute. And this is what I see all around the world.
And are you now still a threat as President of the General Assembly, for example, for Russia or other countries?
Well, I'm trying to serve every member state.
Also Russia?
Yes.
Mr. Putin also?
Well, I am serving the people of Russia. I'm not serving certain governments because, especially in democracies, governments change. But I'm committed to serving the interest of all members, being all the citizens from every country, including Russia, including everyone else. But as I said, I'm serving on the base of the Charter of the United Nations. And the Charter is clear that you're not allowed to invade your neighbor, and this is why I'm also continuing to speaking out that a war of aggression is a breach of international law, and I see it as a responsibility for the General Assembly to name it if injustice unfolds.
All right. There is one man the world is preoccupied with every day, and this is what he has to say about the United Nations.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war.
Empty words don't solve wars. United Nations seems to do nothing, produce only paperwork. Does the President of the United States have a point when he gives this kind of critique towards your organization?
Yes, because empty words are nothing. You have to walk the talk and not talk the talk.
So he's right about his criticism.
The first part of his criticism, because the implementation of all the resolution lies in the hands of the member states, the General Assembly, the President of the General Assembly, the Secretary General. We don't have our own army. We don't have our own police. We are not having the tools as in countries where government takes a decision and then you have the institutions to implement it. This is the role of member states, to implement it in their own countries or to implement if there is a resolution on peace in Ukraine, which there are many resolutions from the General Assembly, to calling on Russia to withdraw their troops, to return the deported children, to stop attacking civil infrastructure. But if member states are not complying with this, like Russia in this case, then obviously the resolutions from the UN cannot be implemented. So I also reminded all the heads of states in my introductory remarks just seconds before the US president spoke that every government, every head of state should ask themselves, what do I do to deliver the promises of the Charter? What did my country contribute to peace and security around the world? And I think the interesting fact is, even though obviously the US administration is very critical towards UN, not only in the high-level week did all the heads of states who were able to attend, but they always come back to the institutions because the UN is the only place where all countries have a seat at the table, no matter how big or small, how rich or powerful they are. So if you want to implement something for the whole world, you need the United Nations. There's no alternative.
Yeah, you refer to the post-World War II period, the UN Charter. And what's interesting is the United States always took the lead, and now the United States is stepping back. Who should take the lead now?
Everybody who believes in international law as, again, their self-interest. I think this is very important. We had it also with the Iranian-US war. Some governments saying this is something theoretical international law. But it's not. We see it now. Yeah, what happened in one region, if the Strait of Hormuz is being closed, you see the suffering all over the world. Some countries even declared the state of energy emergency because of the exploding energy prices. So international law is nothing abstract. It's very concrete, and therefore it's in the interest of every government, every continent. And I gave a speech in front of the European Parliament calling on the European Union to use this opportunity now. The European Union has a strong economic power. If the EU joins forces, for example, like in trade agreement with Mercosur, but also with India, they are representing a big amount of the GDP worldwide. So together with this cross-regional alliances, you do have the power also against the strongest, also against those who do not follow the rules anymore, as we saw in the case of Greenland. For weeks, the Europeans didn't really dare to speak the truth, speak the facts, but when they united, when they got also support from other member states and made crystal clear Greenland belongs to Greenlanders, and there's no question about it. Obviously, also the claims, the false claims from the American side stopped.
And that's interesting that you mentioned Europe, because what do you expect from Europe, especially Europe? Does Europe have a special role in all of this, in preserving international diplomacy and international law?
The European peace is built also on the United Nations. I mean, the United Nations and the founders of the European Union, back then called European Community, it's all built on the same principles, that rules are the best guarantee for freedom, for security, and also for prosperity and economic growth. This is the whole idea of the European Union, and therefore the guarantee for a whole world to play by the rules is also in the best economic interest of the European Union. As a single European market, we do have a power also with relation for the dollar, for example. If we are looking at the situation using tariffs against other regions around the world to pursue your own interests, if the European Union uses its own economic power, uses the single services market, also with regard to the fact of the depths of the US towards not only Europe but also other regions around the world. I mean, there's a lot of power, but you have to join forces with others. The African continent, for example, would have a huge interest also economic-wise, working on a trade agreement for the whole continent, for themselves, a free trade zone. So if you join forces there as well, you will have new alliances which could bring also more justice with regard to the past, looking at the colonial past also from Europe. So it offers also total new opportunities.
Fair enough. Of course, Africa, the significance of that continent has to be said. But let's stay in Ukraine, because I heard you earlier this year in a German program, and you sounded a little bit frustrated about the role Europe has taken when it comes to Ukraine. You expected more from Europe. What do you expect from Europe when it comes to Ukraine?
Well, I know myself how hard it is, and in these days, it's 4 years now that this horrible war is waging. Ukraine needs more support than ever, and Ukraine is Europe. And therefore, first and foremost, it's the European Union, it's the European continent, it's the OSCE, which is responsible for the peace on the European continent. And always remember, everyone in Europe, that it's in their own security interest. The Ukrainians are defending also the freedom and security of any other European country. And this is why we have to stay engaged, and this is why obviously it would be way more easy if there would be the permanent support by the US, especially also with regard of the situation in NATO. But the Europeans cannot sell the European peace, because otherwise we will lose the peace for all of us altogether.
And would it have made a difference if Ukraine wasn't a democracy and wouldn't want to be part of the European family, just a regime, for example? Does the same apply to that if it was, because it's a blatant violation of the UN Charter? Does it make a difference?
I said in many occasions, because obviously we are living in a very complicated, complex world, and sometimes I felt, especially in times as a foreign minister, it would be easier if you would know less about a conflict, because then it doesn't become so complex. And if you're just looking at having a yes or no answer, a white or black answer, it makes the life, especially for populists, way more easy. But our world is complex. We saw it in the Middle East crisis. And I said every time, for me, a human being is a human being. It doesn't matter where he or she is born, if he or she is living in a democracy or in an autocracy or in a dictatorship. Our responsibility as human beings ourselves, and then responsible leaders, is to defend the dignity and the human rights of every human being. So answering also your question, if Ukrainian people would also live in an oppressive country, it's still forbidden if one state invades another country by the Charter. And this is the core principle of the UN, that you don't look at, is it my friend or is it not my friend, but the principles are the same for everyone.
Yeah, but the Secretary General, your colleague Antonio Guterres, he says the United Nations Charter is crystal clear. He has said that the conflict between the US and Israel on the one hand, and on the other hand, Iran, undermines international peace and international law. Do you agree with him on that?
Yes, we had the same statement on the 28th of February, if you're relating to that one, where I said as well that the UN Charter is nothing optional. Yes, also in this kind of situation, as I said before, situations are complex. There have been severe human rights violations, more than 40,000 people being killed by the Iranian government, killing your own future, your own young people, because they are going to the streets, what we just find normal, that we can speak.
We have to defend the sovereignty of the Iranians.
The nuclear program, the attacks on Israel, it's all there. But I said also, this is why we have mechanism within the UN where we should address these issues. And I myself, as the German foreign minister, I brought the case against the violations of civilians in Iran to the Human Rights Council with a fact-finding mission. It was a tough thing because not every member state supported it. So bringing these cases to the UN organs, I mean, if a country or more countries say to the Security Council, we see so severe human rights violation, or we see a threat to peace and security, the UN has an answer. Chapter 7. Chapter 7 would enable also in cases of genocide, for example, our lessons from the past, that we not watch and see what happened in Srebrenica or in Rwanda, but the UN, the international community acts. But this is exactly the responsibility of the Security Council, the permanent five, and the US being a member of the Security Council, bringing this topic to the Security Council, but they choose a different way, acting unilaterally, and this unilateral action is against the Charter.
They didn't bring it to the United Security Council. In Europe, because of the complex situation, there was a great deal of understanding. For example, from our Prime Minister, Rob Jetten, his British colleague, Keir Starmer, but also from Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor. 2 days after the outbreak of the war, he was visiting the White House and said the following.
As I said in Germany the last 2 days, we are supporting the United States and Israel to get rid of this terrible terrorist regime. And we are looking forward to a day after, and we have to talk about the strategy. What is following after this regime is away, and we have to strategize on this entire region.
So no mention of Charter 7, Security Council or United Nations, whatever. The words of Chancellor Friedrich Merz are very clear. He supports the action of the United States because he wants also to get rid of the regime in Tehran. What's at stake when countries start applying the United Charter only selectively?
I think especially also in the European Union, the latest statements on this issue have a different tone because everybody can see that international law is nothing abstract, but what happens in the Strait of Hormuz has direct effects to the Europeans, but even graver to poorer countries around the world, where again, similar like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, food prices are exploding again, yes. And the poorest are suffering most. And this understanding that an interconnected world, there are no isolated crises anymore. They are always touching our own interests, and therefore standing up for international law, also in this case, the law of the sea, the action from the Iranians attacking ships. This is a violation of international law as well again.
And the blockade of the Americans?
It's the same, and we had yesterday a debate in the General Assembly because the Security Council, again, there were vetoes by China and Russia this time, and the vast majority of member states again said in the General Assembly the freedom of navigation, the law of the sea, the international law is in our interest, and this is why it has to be respected by all member states. Again, it's not easy. It's not easy, but I think it's always important to remember what do we do in our own national context. Sometimes we face very difficult situations also relating to the law. I remember it was quite some time ago in Germany, there was a kidnapping of a child. And everybody thought that the kidnapper knew where the child is, and it was a situation, I don't get all the facts together, but that the child might die if you don't find it. And there was a debate on maybe if you use torture against the kidnapper, maybe we can save the child, which obviously would, in the interest of the child,
which is
right.
a legitimate objective.
Yes.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you have a constitution, you have clear rules in your laws of saying there are some red lines we cannot cross, even though the objective is more than right. And these dilemmata you always face as lawyers, you have in your constitutions.
But in the end, as President of the General Assembly, you say you have always to choose rights above might and not might above rights.
Exactly, and this is also what constitutional courts do in every national context. There can be also a clash of norms in your own constitution, and then you have to say which prevails. And the highest, in our case in Germany, die Würde des Menschen, the dignity of human beings. So remembering this, that it's not either we choose international law or we don't do anything and we just watch human rights violation. This is not the case. There are instruments in between.
You can use the United Nations to.
And this is the hard job about diplomacy. Diplomacy is about trying for days, for months, sometimes for years. I mean, if we look also in the wars, look at the wars from the past, they do it on for years, but not to give up, to try diplomacy every day until this one day we finally find the opportunity for ceasefires. And we see it also with regard to Gaza, or now also the situation right now. The efforts of bringing the actors together are at the end the only ones to come to the chance of finding a way back to peace.
The next part of our conversation with this picture. The United Charter, war, peace are important touch-ons for you. When did your views start to take shape? At what age? And maybe you can describe, because it is you, obviously, of course, what kind of child you were and when did it all start for you?
Well, this was in primary school. Obviously, at
you had no
Fasching,
notion of international law
Carnival
at that time.
back then. I wanted to become a gardener. I don't know, I was 9 or 10, maybe this is why I joined the Green Party at some point. But I started with wars at the Balkans, but also this was also where the Iraq War, one of the Iraq wars was. And I remember already back then, I don't know why actually, because my parents were not in politics at all. My mother worked in a kindergarten and my father was an engineer, but I discussed even in my primary school, can we celebrate Fasching or have fun if there is a war? It was back then the slogans on demonstration, no war for oil. And I wondered that children still wanted to play with me, kind of thinking she's a bit nerdy at this age to discuss.
Because how old were you at that time?
Yeah, so it was primary school, it must be... when was a big war, like beginning of the 90s, so
90, you were 9 years old or something
10,
like that.
Yeah, 10 something, yeah.
10.
Well, anyway, obviously, I don't know why, but I was somehow
But what is it
interested.
exactly that you were busy with that kind of geopolitical questions and also about social justice and international solidarity?
I think there are always different reasons why you turn out to be the person you are at the end. But in my childhood already, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. So she went through the whole horrors of the Second World War, obviously Germany being the perpetrator, but so many also Germans having the consequences being felt, like rape, like diverse suffering, having to flee.
What kind of stories did she tell you? Was she very open about it?
She was, but I did not understood them as a child. And unfortunately, I did not really ask when I should really ask. But she told me stories about, because she lived back then in Poland, which was back then Germany. But so she told me how they had to flee a couple of times on trains, and she explained me she was there with other children, and one mother went down to get water when the train stopped, and then the train started again, and the mother didn't make it back to the train, and all the stories about children in war. She always warned me, I'm being now quite open, but I think about these cases you have to be quite open, saying, and remember one thing, Annalenchen, she always called me Annalenchen, this is a short form for kids in Germany. When the bad men are coming, you have to shit into your own pants. Then they try to not touch you.
And how do you say that in German?
Einscheißern.
Einscheißen.
Okay, this is maybe not for TV, but...
it's Netherlands, we can do that.
I know, you're way more direct than German.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, the topic is very important. So I did not understand this as a child, but this understanding, I mean, we're having still this debate that every woman has to fear being raped, even and especially in times of war. Unfortunately, this is still one of the urgent topics, and somehow these kind of stories stick with me. And then in school, when we had refugee kids coming from the Western Balkans, and always thinking about why do some people like myself have the luck to be in peace and in security. I wrote an article in the school magazine about hope the sky would be just simply blue, was the headline. It was a quote from a girl in Grozny. So when Chechnya, yeah. So I mean, these constant conflicts we had also back then, and I think this is also what we should not forget. It was not that 20 or 30 years ago everything was in peace. Yeah, we had the same situation. So somehow this resonated with me, but my big wish was to write about it, to become a journalist.
You could have become a journalist.
Yes, obviously I did not make it. I started in my local newspaper, so at the weekends I always reported about the sports event in my villages around. It was a rural area.
You could have become really important by becoming a journalist, but you chose for politics.
I then did, this is what I encourage also young people. Yeah, don't say I want to be a CEO and just like the last step in mind, but it has many different curves. So I started an internship in the European Parliament. This is also where my European passion came from, because I thought it would be good to know Parliament, and this is why I studied public international law, to understand this from the inside, to write about it. But when I started in the European Parliament, it was 2004, it was like a longer internship, a traineeship, and it was exactly the year when the 10 Eastern and Middle Eastern European countries joined.
Yeah.
And I had the chance to be on the 1st of May in 2004, more than 20 years ago, on the bridge between, it's called Frankfurt an der Oder and Słubice, so from Poland and Eastern Germany, when Joschka Fischer, back then as the foreign minister, together with the Polish foreign minister,
the Green Party,
had this like literally opening again and
even
celebrations.
I can remember that historical
and
moment.
it's like really you have like Gänsehaut in German. And I thought standing there on this bridge, kind of, wow, politics can really change something. And it was also the area where my grandfather, who fought for the Wehrmacht, so that generation committing the worst crimes, not by himself, but being in the Wehrmacht, being responsible for this. Yeah, it was the same river, not the same bridge, but it was the same area. I'm thinking, you standing there, another generation, and yes, it's in our hands to change the future. We cannot rewrite history, but we can change the future. And I think this was really the point back then, doing an internship, thinking want to go into journalism, and kind of saying, oh, maybe we can just join the party now as well, because...
you joined the party, you've been a trailblazer, party leader, Germany's first female foreign minister, now one of the very few women to lead the United Nations General Assembly. What does that say about how slowly power structures are changing?
Yeah, but I mean, also looking...
The glass is half full.
The glass is half full, yeah, and also was a bit my generation. We are another generation of women. We don't have to fight anymore just as lonely women, because there are no women at all. Still too little. I'm the 5th out of 80 presidents of the General Assembly. Yeah. But I had like female foreign minister colleagues. Yeah, we had this network of female foreign ministers, and also the network of feminist foreign policy, highly controversial in my country. But the purpose and reason was not invented by myself, but by the Swedish and also the Latin American ones, saying women's rights are determinator for the freedom of a society. Because if women are not free, no one is free in a country. Worst case we see in Afghanistan. But if women are free and especially safe, everyone is safe. And interestingly, almost the same words I heard from a very old lady at the back then contact line between the Russian occupied territories in eastern Ukraine and Ukraine before the full invasion. And I mean, this is the experience from women all around the world in all conflict zones, that the security of women is crucial for the security of a society. And this is why, for me, the issue of women's rights is in every part, in peace and security, economy, is so important.
So maybe it will help if the next Secretary General will be a woman, because as I understand, you play a role, your assembly play a role in the election process. Since the founding of the United Nations, there has never been a female Secretary General. Is it going to be a woman finally? Because it will be next week, it will be decided.
I don't know. There's a strong call, because in becoming very formal and diplomatic again, because this is my role, the so-called resolution, which sets a base for this process, which I'm sharing, member states in unanimity called on strongly nominating women. So in theory, all the member states want to have women. We come again to the question of implementation.
So it's crystal clear when it comes to the General Assembly. They want a woman. You want a woman, so it's going to happen.
I would not bet everything on this, because you mentioned also before how little women are also in international diplomacy leadership, because obviously it's a question of power, and nobody gives up power freely. And this is why so many women still today are hitting with their heads against what we literally call
the ceiling.
The ceiling, yeah. So it's up to the member states. But we see also that not only female candidates are there are candidates from both genders, which is legitimate. So in the end, the decision has to be made. The best person, obviously, for this job is needed. However, it's hard to explain in these times if you want to represent the whole diversity of humanity, of which half, so 4 billion people, are women and girls, how in 80 years an institution standing for human rights has never chosen a woman.
Yeah. And of course, the Security Council also plays a big role in selecting the next Secretary General. Let's talk about the structure within the United Nations. So, for example, when a majority of the world supports Palestinian statehood, but the United Nations does not grant its full sovereign recognition of Palestine, do you understand why many countries, many people, especially in the global south, are frustrated?
Yes, totally understand. And then it comes again to the procedures. And again, it's similar like in our own national context. So the majority of the General Assembly says we should grant Palestine their statehood, because it was promised already decades ago with one of the first resolutions actually. It's a position of the European Union, two-state solution also for the conflict, yet by the rules. And we have to play by the rules. The Security Council has to agree. The permanent P5 have to agree, because they have to implement it as well in the national context. And in the Security Council, not everybody is ready for that. But it doesn't mean that the rest of the countries is not doing anything. This is why I mentioned this so-called two-state solution conference back in September with 142 member states, underlining that it's a strong wish. On a bilateral case, member states did it by themselves. But again, I'm having the strong call for not giving up the principle, not stop doing what is right because it's so difficult, because then the mighty would win and we would lose everything.
You already also defended the glass is half full, but still in the end,
but make it the example from the national context. I don't know how it's in the Netherlands, but in Germany, the vast majority of people say our education system is not at the part where it should be. More money should go into it, and that
discussion in Holland.
That we separate between our 16 federal states and don't have more power there. So everybody is agreeing. But when it comes to the point, so let's change it, the 16 states have to agree. And obviously their Ministerpräsidenten, how we call it, will say, maybe we want to speak about this by ourselves. So also there, we are not saying also let's get rid of our second chamber, the Bundesrat, because they cannot agree. What some suggest for the UN just gets rid of it, but trying and trying again until in a democracy you find the support from everybody, and this means in the UN also from the Security Council.
It's a good example. Germany, the federal state of Germany, there are 16 federal states, but in the end it's not like the United Nations. There are only 5. We cannot say in Germany Byron can veto a decision from Berlin or something like that. So there's something.
They didn't even sign the constitution back in time.
Maybe back in time, but not now. So in the end, now, for example, when it comes to Palestine, but also other issues, we have to go to the Security Council, and United States, China, French, they can veto. Isn't that a problem?
It makes life obviously way harder, but for me it's always important as a responsible politician and now president to ask what is the alternative. Because we can only do a reform of the Security Council again if the permanent 5 agree, and at the moment they are not ready to give up their veto right voluntarily. So some have proposed just get rid of the Security Council, we form our new board, the Board of Peace, for example. But is this really the alternative which serves the purpose for peace and security or for Palestine? Having another body where the same members have now a unique veto right. So in practice, there is no alternative to the UN institution. So this is why we keep on trying the reform. If we cannot do 100% right now, we did it in small steps. The first steps were that France and UK said we voluntarily do not take our veto right if we are the only one. There was a second initiative just recently, the so-called veto initiative. So if single countries draw their veto, they have to explain themselves in the General Assembly. This happened now with the case of the Strait of Hormuz and the situation in Middle East. So the broader membership can say, but we see it differently. It was couple of times the case for Ukraine, and there the majority of member states agreed on a durable and lasting and just peace. And there are more initiatives now saying in the case of genocide or crimes against humanity, the veto should not be casted at all. Even in the Charter it says if you're part of the conflict, you should not use your veto right. And this is now something, for example, I brought forward as the President of the General Assembly. We have special working groups on this. We did not achieve everything over the last 15 years. Let's take now the smaller steps to continue, for example, implementing what is already in the Charter.
Do you think that with a reformed United Nations, a catastrophe such as Gaza or Sudan, for that matter, might have unfolded differently if we would not have the Security Council, just the General Assembly and no national interests before the interests of international law and diplomacy?
We will never live in a world without any national interest because we are not living in a dream world. We have to take the world as it is and make the best out of this situation. At least this is how I define my job, and I can ensure everyone no single day would we be better off without this United Nations. Yes. Because even though I'm getting also more than frustrated some days if I see that we cannot solve the horrible war in Ukraine, that people are still suffering tremendously in Gaza. Sudan, we didn't even speak about Sudan, like worst crimes against humanity. Absolutely. Incredible. But the UN is also so much more. We have made possible that even in these conflict zones, people, children got a bit of food, that education is being provided again. And we have all the other agencies. 125 million children would not go to school if we would not have UNICEF. So if we would say we get rid of the UN, they would not literally go to school anymore.
But only get rid of the Security Council.
But then you would get rid of the whole institution. I'm calling on member states to stay in the UN and to finance the UN. This is also the problem, also with the P5 and the US. They should pay their contributions, and this could be also the point about their rights and their veto rights, because there's also something in the Charter. If you don't pay in a row your amounts and your fees, then you could lose your veto rights and your rights in the General Assembly. So this is why my call is also to everybody to pay their contributions, because we are saving everyday lives, and this is the best you can do as an institution or as a person.
One more question I have to ask you. We can now see the consequences in Gaza more clearly than before. The blockade is still in place, hardly any food or aid is getting in. People are still dying. Looking back, I know you have a different function, of course. With everything we know now, would you have acted differently during your time as a minister?
I constantly ask myself in every situation what could have done or I could have done differently. So also with the situation in Gaza, which is simply horrible and was horrible, asking should we have put more pressure on the Israeli government, for example, but also in the beginning on the Arab countries, because the challenge in the beginning was that many did not even recognize that the 7th of October, the terrorist attacks from the Hamas were severe violations of human rights and international law as well. So in this whole part of the picture, what we tried, including myself, is to say, how can we bring the actors at the table to find a ceasefire and to come out of this situation, and as German Foreign Minister, with especially strong ties also to Israel, to open border crossings to get in humanitarian aid as well.
I have no doubt that you negotiated with Israel about the food trucks. I know, of course, good to mention
I know,
but the question is, with what we know right now, just in 2026, of course, there is more data, more information, the situation is continuing. Just looking back from a personal view of points, not necessarily political, how do you reflect on that period?
This is what I'm trying to describe, to identify points if more pressure on Israel, but as I said, it needed everybody in the region, also more pressure on other actors would have helped. And I come to the point that there was a moment, it was Ramadan, half a year after the 7th of October, where we discussed in a very small group with Arab countries, with the then US administration, on very similar things as a peace plan by the 142 member states, to put it together and jointly at the table. Mm-hmm. But not everybody was ready, because the question was, if you put it once and it's not being followed through, also and especially by the Israeli government, but also if Arab partners would have the courage to put it together on the table, then it's kind of just nothing, and there's no tool anymore. And looking backwards, I think this plan should have been put on the table. Okay,
so thank you, Madam Baerbock. Just one question. As a child, you mentioned already competitive trampolinist. Your term as president runs until the end of this summer. What's going to be your next jump in your career path? Back to Germany, maybe? Politics? Or will you stay on the international stage?
Thanks God we are a strong democracy in Germany, so there won't be any elections coming up soon, and I left the parliament. So for the moment, everything is open again, and as you mentioned, trampoline. This was the best practice for my job, because you learn up and downs and up and downs and trying again and trying again. Okay. And you also know that the sky is the limit.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Baerbock.